There is something deeply unsettling hiding inside your last name. Not a secret you were told and then forgot. Not a story buried in some dusty library shelf that nobody visits anymore. This is something far older. Something encoded. Something that has been waiting. Locked inside the biological architecture of your very cells. For the moment when science finally caught up with history and cracked open a door that nobody knew existed. And right now, in this precise window of time, that door is open. The question is whether you are paying attention. Because here is what nobody is saying loudly enough. The last name you carry, the one on your passport, the one your grandparents whispered in church, the one your great-grandmother kept even when everything else was stripped away during the famine, and the forced migrations and the centuries of colonial erasure, that name is not just a label. It never was. It is a transmission. A coded biological signal sent forward through time by a man who lived over 1,000 years ago, a man who ruled land, commanded warriors, and built a dynasty so dominant that its genetic fingerprint is still detectable today in a saliva sample collected in a modern laboratory. That is not metaphor. That is molecular biology. And if your surname is among the 12 we are about to examine, then what you are about to hear changes everything you thought you knew about where you come from. Let us start with a fact that most people completely miss. Ireland was the first country in the entire European world to develop hereditary surnames passed down through the paternal line. Not England, not France, not the great empires of the Mediterranean. Ireland. Beginning around 800 AD, while the rest of Europe was still identifying people by profession, geography, or physical appearance, the Irish were already operating a genealogical system. The O prefix, O in its original form, meant grandson of or descendant of. The Mac prefix meant son of. These were not decorative additions. They were genealogical declarations. When a man introduced himself as O. Brienne, he was not just stating his name. He was announcing his bloodline, his territorial allegiance, his clan affiliation, and his position within a social hierarchy that determined everything from his right to land to his obligation in battle. Think about what that means. Your surname is not a coincidence. It was architecture. And here is where the science enters, and where things begin to feel genuinely extraordinary. In the year 2025, Irish Origines, one of the most advanced platforms in genetic genealogy, introduced the capability to take a Y-DNA terminal SNP result, a specific marker on the male chromosome, and use it to pinpoint with remarkable precision the exact geographic location in Ireland where a paternal ancestor lived. Not the country, not the province, the specific region, the valley, in some cases, the territory of a clan that existed 12 centuries ago. The DNA does not lie. It does not drift. The Y chromosome passes from father to son with almost perfect fidelity, and within it, mutations accumulate at predictable rates, creating a kind of biological timestamp. What researchers discovered when they began systematically comparing these timestamps against the surnames attached to them was something that stopped geneticists mid-sentence. Almost every one of Ireland's estimated 1,500 distinct ancient clans traces back to a single founding male ancestor, one man, one biological origin point. Scientists have started calling these men Adams, not as a religious reference, but as a genetic one. For surnames like Sullivan and Ryan, researchers confirmed that every male bearing that name traces back to a single founding Adam. One man, one lineage, radiating outward across centuries and continents. And now, for the first time, we can find him. But here's where it gets significantly more complicated and significantly more revealing, because the real story is not just that Irish surnames encode ancient clan membership. The real story is what those clans were, what power they held, what blood they carried, and why the English crown spent 400 years specifically trying to destroy the system that made those surnames meaningful. You do not spend 4 centuries trying to erase something unless it is genuinely dangerous. The clan system of ancient Ireland was not a primitive tribal arrangement. It was a sophisticated political and military structure built around the concept of the Derbfine, the patrilineal family group, and the Tuath, the sovereign territory that a clan defended, governed, and passed down through the generations. Each clan had a chief. Each chief had legitimacy that came not from royal appointment, but from blood descent. Remove the clan system, remove the genealogical records, and you remove legitimacy itself. That was the strategy. And it almost worked. The 1922 Four Courts fire in Dublin destroyed an incalculable volume of parish records, land deeds, wills, and census documents. Centuries of documentary genealogy gone in one morning. For most Irish families, particularly those scattered by the Great Famine between 1845 and 1852, during which over 1 million people died of starvation and another million fled the island in a single decade, the paper trail ends in silence. You hit a wall, and beyond that wall, there's nothing. Or at least, there was nothing, until DNA changed the equation entirely, because while the documents burned, the biology survived. Every male descendant of an ancient Irish clan is still carrying, right now, in the Y chromosome he inherited from his father, who inherited it from his father, who inherited it from his father, going back 40 or 50 or 60 generations, the molecular evidence of exactly which clan he came from. The archive did not burn. It was simply stored in a different location. Now, let us talk about the 12 surnames. And let us start not with the most famous one, but with the one that reveals the greatest depth of what DNA has uncovered. The name is O'Neill. In Irish, O-Nail, it means descendant of Niall. And the Niall in question is one of the most genetically significant human beings who has ever lived on this island. Niall of the Nine Hostages, known in Irish as Niall Naoi Noe Gaelic, was a 5th century High King of Ireland. He is described in the ancient annals as a military genius and a political strategist who took hostages, including the young man who would become St. Patrick, from rival chieftains across Ireland and from coastal raids into Britain and France, using them as living collateral to hold competing dynasties in check. He had, according to historical tradition, 12 sons. And those 12 sons became the roots of a dynasty, the Uí Nail, that dominated Irish kingship for 6 centuries. But here's the thing that moves this from history into something almost incomprehensible. In 2006, a team of geneticists at Trinity College Dublin, led by Professor Daniel Bradley and including researcher Brian McAvoy, conducted a systematic survey of Y chromosomes across Ireland. They were looking for patterns. What they found was a specific genetic signature, a subclade of the Y chromosome haplogroup R1b designated RM222, that appeared in remarkable concentrations in northwest Ireland, the historical stronghold of the Uí Nail dynasty. In that region alone, they found this genetic pattern in approximately 21.5% of men. Nearly 1 in 5 men in northwest Ireland carries what is now commonly referred to as the genetic fingerprint of Niall of the Nine Hostages. Across the entire island of Ireland, the signature appears in approximately 8.2% of men, which means roughly 1 in 12 Irish men, regardless of where they live today, carries this specific Y chromosome marker. And it does not stop at Ireland's borders. The same researchers found the signature in approximately 10% of men in western and central Scotland. And here is the detail that ought to make you pause for a moment. Approximately 1 in 50 New Yorkers of European heritage carries the same marker, 1 in 50. In a city of 8 million people, that is the genetic weight of a single 5th century Irish king, still measurable, still present, still encoded in living human beings walking the streets of Manhattan in 2025. And this is where everything changes, because the surnames connected to this genetic lineage are specific and they are traceable. Family Tree DNA, the world's largest genetic genealogy database, has cataloged the surnames most frequently associated with the RM222 signature, and the list reads like a roll call of ancient Irish power. O'Neill, Gallagher, Boyle, Doherty, O'Donnell, Cannon, Bradley, O'Reilly, Flynn, Quinn, McLaughlin, Donnelly. If any of these names belong to your family, you are not simply carrying a surname. You may be carrying the biological inheritance of a dynasty that once governed the island of Ireland from the 5th century to the 17th. That is not ancestry tourism. That is 1,200 years of unbroken biological transmission, confirmed by molecular science in a modern laboratory. Now let us talk about Murphy. Because Murphy is not just the most common surname in Ireland, it is a case study in what DNA reveals when you look beneath the surface of a name that seems almost too ordinary to carry extraordinary weight. Murphy comes from the Gaelic O Merchada, meaning descendant of Merchad, which translates to sea warrior or sea battler. The name is particularly concentrated in County Cork, and it sits at the top of every Irish surname frequency table with remarkable consistency. According to the Central Statistics Office's most recent genealogical data, Murphy remains the single most common surname across Ireland, with over 78,000 registered bearers in Ireland alone and millions more in the Irish diaspora across the United States, Australia, Britain, and Canada. But here's what most people carrying this name do not know. Research has confirmed that the surname Murphy, despite its widespread distribution today, traces back to a single founding ancestor, a singular biological origin point in Munster. The DNA evidence supports the genealogical records in a way that makes historians genuinely uncomfortable, because it means the explosion of this name across the entire world is not the result of multiple independent origins. It is the result of one man's lineage surviving everything that was thrown at it: famine, colonization, migration, suppression. And the descendants of that one man are now among the most numerically significant surname groups on Earth. What most people are not seeing is that the sheer global reach of the Murphy surname is itself a form of historical evidence. You do not spread that far from a single point of origin without an original moment of remarkable biological and social success. Let us move to O'Brien, and here the history becomes something closer to legend that DNA has chosen to confirm. O'Brien, in Irish O'Brien, means descendant of Brian, and the Brian in question is Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland, whose name is synonymous with the single greatest military achievement in Irish history. In 1014, at the Battle of Clontarf, Brian Boru led an Irish alliance against Viking forces and their Irish allies in a confrontation that effectively ended the age of Viking territorial expansion on the island. He won the battle. He did not survive it. He was killed in his tent as the fighting concluded, which is the kind of devastating historical irony that makes the story impossible to forget. The O'Brien clan that descended from his line became one of the most powerful dynasties in Munster, governing the province and contesting the high kingship of all Ireland for centuries after Brian's death. According to genetic research examining the Dalcase, the dynastic group from which Brian Boru emerged, the Y chromosome signatures of O'Brien males cluster in ways that confirm a common paternal origin deep in the genealogical record. If you carry the name O'Brien, you are not simply honoring a family tradition. You are the biological continuation of a line that fought Vikings and won, a line that shaped the political geography of Ireland at the moment when Ireland was still deciding what it would become. And then there is McCarthy, McCarthy in the original Irish, son of Carthach. The McCarthy clan was the dominant power in Munster, specifically in the kingdoms of Cork and Kerry, for centuries before and after the Norman invasion of 1169. They were kings of Desmond, the southern part of Munster, and their story is one of the most dramatic in Irish history precisely because of how long they held on and how fiercely they resisted what was being done to the Gaelic social order around them. The DNA evidence for the McCarthy lineage connects them to the Eognacht dynasty, one of the oldest documented royal houses in Irish history, tracing their origins back to the semi-legendary Eogan Mór. Genetic markers associated with the McCarthy surname cluster in Munster, in patterns that align with the historical territorial maps of the clan's ancient territory, which is itself extraordinary. The land the clan held, the DNA of the people who held it, and the name passed down through the generations all point to the same origin. If your surname is McCarthy, the science is telling you something specific about a specific place and a specific lineage that most families on Earth would give almost anything to access. Now, consider what happened to all of these surnames during the centuries of English rule, because this is the part of the story that is most important and least discussed. When Henry VIII declared himself King of Ireland in 1542, he did not simply change a political title. He began the systematic dismantling of the Gaelic social order that had organized Irish life for more than 1,000 years. The Tudor and Stuart conquests that followed were not just military operations, they were genealogical operations. The destruction of the clan system was intentional. Suppress the chiefs, confiscate the territories, break the link between a surname and its ancestral land, and you destroy the legitimacy that the clan system depended upon. The plantation of Ulster in the early 17th century specifically targeted the lands of the great Ulster clans, O'Neill and O'Donnell chief among them. In 1607, the flight of the Earls, in which the last great Gaelic chiefs of Ulster sailed into exile and never returned, represented the final collapse of the clan system as a functioning political reality. But here is what the colonizers did not calculate, what they could not calculate, because the science did not exist yet. They could destroy the documents. They could confiscate the land. They could ban the Gaelic language. They could anglicize the surnames, stripping the O and Mac prefixes during periods of intense suppression, turning O'Neill into Neil, McCarthy into McCarthy, O'Murchada into Murphy. But they could not touch the Y chromosome. They could not legislate against biology. And so the genetic record of every Irish clan survived intact, hidden in the bodies of the people the colonizers thought they had erased. This brings us to the name Kelly. O'Chelly in Irish. It is the second most common surname in Ireland, with over 58,000 bearers according to current records, and it is deeply connected to the ancient Connaught dynasties of the west of Ireland. The Kelly clan traces its origins to figures like Kellach of Connaught, and the surname is particularly concentrated in County Galway and the surrounding regions, though today it is found in every county in Ireland and in virtually every country with a significant Irish diaspora. The Y DNA evidence for Kelly is fascinating precisely because of what it reveals about the social dynamics of ancient Irish clan membership. According to researchers at Irish Origines and Family Tree DNA, approximately 50% of men bearing any given Irish surname carry Y DNA that reflects direct patrilineal descent from the founding ancestor of that surname's clan. The other 50% acquired the surname through what geneticists call non-paternal events, which is a clinical term for adoption, maternal transmission of the surname, or in many historical cases, the absorption of smaller families into a more powerful clan's identity as a matter of survival or political alliance. This means that if you carry the surname Kelly today, there's approximately a 50% chance that your Y chromosome connects you directly to the original Keeloch, and a 50% chance that your ancestor was someone who chose or was absorbed into the Kelly identity at some point in the last 1,000 years. Both stories are real, both are Irish, but only DNA can tell you which one is yours. Let us not pass over Gallagher without giving it the weight it deserves. O Galchab. The word comes from Gaul, meaning stranger or foreigner, and cabhair, meaning help. Gallagher is the most common surname in County Donegal, which is significant because Donegal sits squarely within the ancient territory of the Niall dynasty. The Gallagher clan has been documented since the 4th century, making it one of the oldest continuously traceable clan identities in Irish history. And crucially, the Gallagher surname appears on Family Tree DNA's list of surnames most commonly associated with the RM222 genetic signature, the so-called fingerprint of Niall of the 9 hostages. According to informed sources within the genetic genealogy community, Gallagher males who test positive for RM222 are confirming a biological connection to the most dominant royal dynasty in Irish medieval history. That is not a genealogical claim made with paper documents. It is a molecular result. It is repeatable, verifiable, and it points to the same place every time. The name Walsh deserves particular attention because it tells a different but equally powerful story. Walsh comes from the Gaelic Brethnach, meaning Welshman or Briton, and it was applied to families of Welsh origin who arrived with the Norman invasion of Ireland in the 12th century. It is the 4th most common surname in Ireland, with nearly 50,000 bearers, and its prevalence is a reminder that Irish genetic history is not a single thread, but a complex weave. The Norman invasion brought with it not just new military technologies and political structures, but new genetic lineages that became thoroughly integrated into the Irish population over the following centuries. What DNA testing has revealed about Walsh lineages is that the genetic diversity within the surname is notably higher than within surnames of purely Gaelic origin, reflecting the multiple points of geographic origin among the Norman Welsh families who adopted the name. This is itself a form of historical evidence. The DNA is telling a story about the 12th century Norman arrival that no document can tell as clearly, and it is telling you whether your Walsh ancestry traces to a Norman warrior who crossed the Irish Sea in 1169, or to a later adoption of the name across subsequent generations of integration. Now, consider Ryan. O Ryan in Irish. The name means descendant of Ryan, and while the exact historical identity of the founding Ryan remains debated among genealogists, what is not debated is the geographic and genetic concentration of the surname in Tipperary and the surrounding Munster counties. DNA research has confirmed that Ryan, like Sullivan, has a traceable single origin point, a single biological atom from whom all male line Ryan descendants descend. The surname is among the top 5 in Ireland and among the top surnames in Irish American communities in Boston, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, cities that absorbed the heaviest waves of famine-era migration in the 1840s and 1850s. What most people are not seeing when they look at a name this common is that its very prevalence is genealogically meaningful. Common Irish surnames did not become common by accident. They became common because the clans that bore them were powerful, successful, and numerous enough to survive every catastrophe that Irish history could produce. The famine killed over 1 million people. The surnames of the great clans survived. Think about what that means. And then there is O'Sullivan, O Suilia Behin. The name is disputed in its meaning, with scholars divided between the interpretations one-eyed and hawk-eyed, both of which emerge from the Gaelic root sul, meaning eye. The O'Sullivan clan is one of the great Munster families, concentrated in Kerry and Cork, and they carry a reputation in Irish history as some of the most determined resistors of English conquest. The O'Sullivan Moor and O'Sullivan Bear were the 2 great branches of the clan, and their resistance to Tudor conquest in the late 16th century produced one of the most dramatic episodes in Irish military history, the O'Sullivan Bear March of 1602 and 1603, in which a clan chief named Donald Cam O'Sullivan Bear led a group of nearly 1,000 people, soldiers and civilians alike, on a midwinter march from their besieged territory in Cork northward to the protection of an O'Rourke clan chief in Leitrim. The journey of over 200 miles through winter in enemy territory began with nearly 1,000 people. 14 arrived. The O'Sullivan Bear line did not end there. The descendants of those who escaped continued the name. The DNA of the O'Sullivan clan continues today in hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom live in the United States and Australia, where the surname migrated during the famine. Every one of them carries, in their Y chromosome, a biological signature that connects them to the men who made that march. And what about Doyle, O Dubgail, descendant of Dubgal, which translates to dark stranger or dark foreigner, a name historically applied to the Danish Vikings who settled along Ireland's eastern coast in the 9th and 10th centuries. Doyle is concentrated in Leinster, particularly in Dublin, Wexford, and Wicklow. which are precisely the regions where Viking settlement was most intense. The DNA of Doyle males reflects this layered history in ways that are genuinely revealing. Some Doyle lineages carry Y chromosome signatures consistent with Norse Viking origin, which means their genetic ancestry traces back not to ancient Gaelic Ireland, but to the Scandinavian raiders who arrived, settled, intermarried, adopted Gaelic culture, and eventually became so thoroughly Irish that their Viking origin was encoded only in the name Dark Stranger, and in a specific marker on the Y chromosome. This is what the DNA is doing. It is reaching through the cultural absorption, through the centuries of language shift and name anglicization and religious conversion, and showing you what was there before all of that. In some Doyle men, it finds a Viking. And that is not a diminishment. That is the actual, unvarnished truth of what Ireland is genetically. Let us talk about Byrne. O'Broin in Irish. The name means descendant of Bran, and the Bran in question is the 11th century king of Leinster, one of the most powerful rulers of his era in the province. The Byrne clan controlled significant territory in what is now County Wicklow, and they were consistently among the most resistant of the Leinster clans to outside domination, both Viking and Norman. Wicklow's mountains provided natural defensive terrain that the Byrne clan used with remarkable effectiveness for centuries. DNA evidence clusters Byrne Y chromosomes in Leinster in ways that directly reflect the historical territorial boundaries of the clan. The concentration of the signature in Wicklow is not coincidental. It is the molecular residue of centuries of a clan defending and occupying a specific piece of land. And every male Byrne who tests today and finds that Leinster concentrated signature is receiving a biological confirmation that his paternal ancestor stood on that land, held it, and passed the holding forward in time through unbroken chains of fathers and sons. The name Doherty, O Dohartai in Irish, meaning descendant of the unlucky one, which is one of the more self-aware etymological choices in the Irish naming tradition, is concentrated almost entirely in County Donegal and is one of the surnames most consistently linked to the RM222 genetic signature of the Niall dynasty. Doherty males who carry RM222 are, according to Family Tree DNA's Surname Project data, among the strongest genetic confirmations of descent from the Niall of the Nine Hostages lineage. The surname sits within the ancient territorial orbit of the Uí Néill, and the genetic evidence does not challenge the historical genealogy. It confirms it. This is the precise moment where science and history meet and agree, and those moments are rarer than you might think. When they happen, they are worth paying full attention to. And finally, let us consider Fitzpatrick, Mac Giola Fadreg, son of the devotee of St. Patrick. It is the only major Irish surname with the Norman-French prefix Fitz, and it carries within it a fascinating genealogical complexity that recent research, published in the Journal of the Fitzpatrick Clan Society in late 2024 and updated in October 2025, has dramatically expanded. The traditional narrative of the Fitzpatrick surname held that all bearers traced back to a single medieval Ossorian dynasty, the kings of Ossory in what is now County Kilkenny and Lowy. But the new genetic research has disrupted that dominant narrative entirely. What Y-DNA analysis has revealed is that there are not one but 5 distinct clans whose modern members all carry the surname Fitzpatrick, each with a separate biological origin, each traceable to a different geographic region of Ireland. The Fitzpatrick name, in other words, is not a single genealogical thread. It is 5 separate threads that converge on the same modern surname through completely different historical pathways, some through the Ossorian dynasty, some through separate clans of Bryfon in the northwest, some through Cork. Each distinct, each genetically traceable. And until DNA made this analysis possible, the existence of these separate origin points was either unknown or actively suppressed in favor of a single dominant narrative that erased the smaller clans entirely. This is what researchers in 2025 are calling genealogy, the combination of genetic analysis and traditional genealogy, and it is revealing that the stories we told about our surnames were often incomplete, politically shaped, and in some cases deliberately simplified, to serve the interests of the most powerful clans at the expense of the smaller ones. Here's the deeper implication, and it is one that goes far beyond personal genealogy. What DNA is doing to Irish surname research right now is not just providing individuals with interesting ancestry results, it is systematically rewriting the historical record. Medieval Irish genealogies, many of them compiled by professional hereditary poets called Feely, who had both the training and the political incentive to shape genealogical narratives in favor of their patrons, are now being tested against molecular evidence for the first time. And what the researchers are finding, as published in the landmark 2025 study in the European Journal of Human Genetics, using data from over 6,500 individuals with regional Irish and British ancestry, is that the genetic communities in Ireland are real, that they are detectable, and that they align with surname distributions in ways that confirm some traditional genealogical claims while challenging others. The Uí-Néill dominance is confirmed. The single founder model for many common Irish surnames is confirmed, but the neat, heroic narratives of linear descent from a single royal ancestor are frequently complicated by the genetic evidence of adoption, alliance, non-paternal events, and the plain historical reality that Irish society was dynamic, not static, and that clans absorbed outsiders, renamed themselves, and shifted political affiliations in ways that the genealogical documents were never designed to capture, but that the DNA records with perfect indifference. What this all means for the millions of people around the world who carry these 12 surnames is something that science alone cannot fully articulate. It means that the name you carry is not arbitrary. It is specific. It is historically located. It is genetically traceable. And for families who lost their records in the Four Courts fire, who lost their oral histories in the trauma of the famine, who arrived in New York or Boston or Melbourne with nothing but the clothes they wore and the name they carried, that name is now, through the power of Y-DNA analysis, a key that opens a door that was presumed permanently closed. The door leads back through the famine, back through the plantation, back through the Norman invasion, back through the Viking settlements, back through the 1,000-year era of the clan system, back to a man who lived on Irish soil, who held a piece of land, who built a lineage powerful enough that the British Crown spent 4 centuries specifically trying to destroy the system that made his descendants meaningful. And it failed, because the biology survived. But here is what nobody is fully answering yet. Because for every surname confirmed, for every clan identity that DNA has now placed on solid scientific ground, there are hundreds of cases where the genetic evidence does not match the expected genealogical narrative. Cases where a man bearing a great Gaelic surname carries a Y chromosome signature that traces not to ancient Ireland, but to Norse Scandinavia, or Norman France, or the Iberian Peninsula. Cases where 2 men with identical surnames are genetically as distant from each other as Ireland is from Central Asia. The DNA is not always validating the stories. Sometimes it is dismantling them. And in that dismantling, it is raising questions that Irish culture and Irish identity have not yet begun to process. What does clan membership mean when the biology contradicts the name? What does it mean to be O'Neill if your Y chromosome traces to a Norman soldier who took the name in the 13th century? What does it mean to be Murphy if your paternal line carries no trace of the founding Adam? And conversely, what does it mean if a man named Smith or Jones or Williams, names that sound entirely English, carries the RMP222 signature of Niall of the 9 hostages in his Y chromosome, a biological inheritance that the cultural erasure of his Irish identity never managed to touch? These are not comfortable questions. They are not the kind of questions that fit neatly into the celebratory narrative of Irish heritage that fills airports and genealogy websites and St. Patrick's Day events around the world. They are the questions that the science is now forcing into the open, whether or not anyone is ready for them. And the research is not slowing down. It is accelerating. The number of Irish males who have submitted Y-DNA samples to projects like the Family Tree DNA surname groups is growing year over year. The analytical tools, the dynasty trees that map DNA ancestry, the caste trees that map clan ancestry, and the methods for comparing them to identify where they align and where they diverge are becoming more sophisticated every few months. The geographic precision of Irish origins SNP-based origin pinpointing, launched in its current form in 2025, means that in the very near future, a man anywhere on Earth will be able to take a DNA test, enter his results, and receive not just a general Irish ancestry result, but a specific territorial origin, a named clan territory, a probable sept, and a connection to a genealogical record that may go back 40 or 50 generations. The colonizers took the land, they took the language, they took the records. They even took the O and Mac from the names for a time, but they could not take the Y chromosome. And now, 1,200 years after the first Irish surnames were formed as deliberate genealogical declarations, the biology is completing the sentence that history tried so hard to silence. The question is not whether the DNA knows who you are. The DNA has always known. The question is whether you're ready to hear what it is saying, and perhaps the more pressing question, the one that lingers after all the science and all the history and all the molecular confirmation has been laid out, is this. If a name is a transmission sent forward through time by an ancestor who lived before written records, before nation states, before everything we use today to define identity, then what does it say about the durability of a people that the transmission is still arriving? 1,000 years of famine and fire and forced migration and deliberate erasure, and the signal is still reaching you. What does it say about what comes next?